this is how it all began. Which, of course, leads to nonsense like this.
Ultimate Spider-Man is an open-world action-adventure game that was developed by Treyarch, published by Activision, and released in September of 2005 on the PS2, Gamecube and Xbox. The game is based off the comic book of the same name and was created by the same team that developed the very well-known games based on the movie trilogy by Sam Raimi. Upon its release, Ultimate Spider-Man was received generally well, scoring 7 out of 10 with most critics. The setup is that Parker and his childhood friend Eddie Brock discover that their fathers worked on a cure for cancer, which somehow resulted in creating the Venom suit, and that is possibly the worst idea for medical treatment I've ever heard of. Anyway, their fathers create the suit, then lose ownership of it due to some dodgy business deal, and it remains locked in a vault for years. Years later, when both of their parents are dead, Parker and Brock decide to break into the vault and take the suit back. As you would expect, Parker wears the black suit for a while, but shortly realises that it's turning him into a bit of a dick, and then decides to go back to the good old red and blue. Following this, Eddie Brock decides to give the suit a try and is completely consumed by it, which turns him into Venom. The two of them have a scrap, the police show up and Parker flees the scene, seeing nothing of Venom for a few months, and then the game begins. The story from this point on is a mixture between Parker dealing with his double life and Brock wreaking havoc on the city, and both of them learn a little more about their past and the truth behind their parents' death along the way. Gameplay wise, this is, well, a Spider-Man game and comes with all the bits and pieces that you would expect from a game based on the web swinger. It offers you an open world based on New York that you can explore until your heart's content, provides you with plenty of side missions such as time trial races across the city, features hundreds of collectibles, and there are also random events that pop up throughout the city, such as helping injured civilians and preventing muggings. Now, getting around the city is mostly fun and partly a chore. The game takes on the same realistic web swinging mechanics introduced in Spider-Man 2, so you can't just swing off of thin air and you actually have to attach to a building or structure to get around. This would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that the game's opening takes place in the suburbs, making your first few hours feel kind of clunky as you awkwardly bump into houses. Combat is pretty straightforward and focuses on crowd control as you throw out a punch to one enemy, web up another and continue to attack or restrain everyone around you before they wind up for an attack of their own. This is all standard stuff for a game based on this superhero, but where it sets itself apart from other games based on the webhead is the missions that jump back and forth between playing as Spider-Man and playing as Venom. There are some gameplay differences between the two of them. Spider-Man gracefully swings through the city and hits enemies with a flurry of fast combos, and Venom makes giant leaps across the city and takes out multiple enemies at once with one very powerful and heavy attack. Venom also has the ability to regenerate health by consuming other characters, and in comparison to Parker, it is quite fun to play as a more destructive character, making a mess of whichever environment you're placed in. The gameplay for the most part is simple, easy and fun to play, although I would have to say that the Spider-Man portions of the game did leave me feeling a little incompetent. The web mechanics do need tweaking ever so slightly in my opinion, as there does seem to be some inconsistencies with which buildings and structures your web can attach to, and it does prevent the game from feeling as smooth as it should. Another gripe I have with the structure of the missions is that the game requires you to complete a specific number of activities such as races, city events and acquiring collectibles before you're allowed to progress to the next story mission. This would be fine except for the fact that city events aren't always available, so from time to time, even though I had completed all the other requirements to progress through the story, I basically just had to sit around and wait for 2 or 3 more random crimes to occur. Another note on the gameplay is that I found the boss fights particularly frustrating. The design of most boss fights seems to be a very repetitive battle of attrition in which you are by far the weaker opponent. Now, this isn't out of the ordinary for video games. Plenty of boss battles place you as the underdog, but there is a fine line between creating a boss that is challenging and creating a boss that is unfair. Sadly, this game belongs in the second category. One area in which Ultimate Spider-Man does shine is its cutscenes. All of the story is told through a panel-to-panel comic book style, and it really does add a lot to the story, and the cel-shaded art style does a fantastic job of making you feel like you're playing a comic book or cartoon. The animation of Spider-Man swinging from building to building holds up well also, as the subtlety of him leaning to the side slightly instead of swinging in a rigid straight line makes traversing through the city look a lot more dynamic. Sadly, it's not all good news when it comes to the game's visuals. Not only are there some frame rate issues when things get a little hectic, but there is also some serious popping, and when you stand on top of a building and look out at what is supposed to be a glorious cel-shaded New York skyline, you instead see a number of flat buildings with no windows until you get a little closer to them. The voice work is also pretty average and feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, but I suppose that's appropriate.
I never knew your name was Herman.
Oh no, it's you!
Well, you are kind of in my neighborhood, Herman.
Ultimate Spider-Man is a game that I was really looking forward to trying, as I'm a fan of the character and I've played most Spider-Man games since the late 90s. As someone who put endless hours into Spider-Man 2, which was the previous game from the same developer, I was hoping to see a noticeable upgrade on that title. Sadly, I come away from this game somewhat underwhelmed. This game is quite different from its predecessor. It provides a cool art style instead of realism, it provides two iconic playable characters with different playstyles, and it is a good recreation of its comic counterpart. Make no mistake, this is a fun game, but you should know that its technical issues mean that you're playing a game that can be very rough around the edges, and some of the design choices for its gameplay can leave you slightly bored and frustrated. If you're a fan of the hero, then this is definitely worthy of your collection, but you should keep in mind that there are better games based on this character.